I want to start this video by defining some terms. When I say depression, I'm referring to that persistent feeling of sadness and uninterest, the self-negative attitude, and all the other things we get from an upsetting event or situation. You get broken up with, your dog passes away, you realize that you've been lying to yourself about something for the last few years, and it puts you in a state of depression. This is a normal response that everyone experiences at some point or another. Now, when this state of depression becomes chronic, or happens for no reason, or is just particularly severe, that can be a depressive disorder. Something you can be clinically diagnosed with, and something that ruins your ability to live your life normally. Everybody experiences depression. Not everybody has a depressive disorder, though as with most things there is significant overlap between the two. I wanted to establish terminology because not everyone has a consensus on how they use these terms, especially on the internet. I think it's important to have definitions clear when talking about potentially sensitive subjects like this, and so I'll be the first to admit that I completely violated that with the title of this video. Depression, by most definitions, is an illness, because it's a condition that impacts the body and mind. It's probably the first thing you get when you search up mental illness. But it's a little more complicated than that. And so I don't think the standard definition of an illness really fits what depression is or why it develops. So I wanted to talk about that. Why depression shouldn't be framed as an illness, but instead as an adaptive trait that was favorable for our ancestors to evolve. Depression involves an emotional response, and emotions in general are useful for incentivizing us to do things. Something making you happy can motivate you to do it again. Something that makes you sad might motivate you to not do it again. And this is generally geared towards survival and reproduction. See a tiger, feel afraid, and that tells you to get out of there. See a hunky, hot human? Well, feel horny and try to pass down your genetic properties with them. I'm not sure if horny is an emotion, but regardless. Emotion is able to regulate your motivational systems. They are appraisals of situations that tell us how to feel about them, and lead us towards what we should do in regards to them. Depression consists of a lot of sadness, which should motivate us towards some kind of avoidance, usually towards the things that cause the depression. But obviously, it's not so simple with depressed individuals. The sadness of depression can cause people to retreat from everything, not just the things that harm them, even stuff that would probably make the depressed person happier. This is expressed through anhedonia, a key symptom of depression involving a lack of interest, enjoyment, or pleasure from life experiences. This is why we see depressed people pull back from social outings, struggle to get themselves food or shower or clean their room. It's the reason why being depressed consists of not much else besides moping around. Moping around and thinking, that is. It's no secret that depression comes with rumination, a repetitive dwelling of negative thoughts, usually related to the reason for one's depression. These thoughts are constant, they're effortful, and they're distraction resistant. They are thoughts about what could have been, what you could have done differently, self-blame, self-hatred, and it can lead people to spiral and come to very grave conclusions. On the surface, rumination just sounds really unadaptive. Why would our brain evolve to just feel bad about itself over and over again? Shouldn't it try to not be sad in order to maximize survival? Well, not exactly. When we ruminate, we are constantly extracting information from the past, repeatedly going over events to learn about them, identifying the root cause of a problem, patterns that should have been recognized sooner, analyzing what could have been changed. And while it's not very helpful to fixate on something that can't be changed, doing so usually does end up with more understanding towards the situation. In fact, depression may help us just think more rationally overall. A study compared depressed individuals to non-depressed individuals and how they were impacted by the false consensus effect, the tendency for people to assume that their traits and behaviors are the typical ones, even when they aren't. It's like saying because I care about what Tara thinks, everyone cares about what Tara thinks, when in reality, no one gives a shit about what anything Tara has to say at all. It's also why freaks who put the toilet paper this way think that most people would agree with them when they're actually raging psychopaths that deserve jail time for being so strange. But yeah, this study asked students a bunch of questions. Some of them were to determine whether to assign them to depressed or non-depressed conditions, and others found out what they thought about themselves compared to other students in terms of grades and other metrics. Looking at the results, depressed students were more likely to correctly point out when their traits were not the consensus compared to non-depressed individuals. Non-depressed students tended to overrate themselves, while depressed students appeared to be significantly more even-handed with their guesses. Another study had women read pre-made documents about breast cancer risk, and then rate their probability of getting breast cancer based on that information. Just to be clear, the statistically probable answer, and therefore the correct answer, was given to them on the paper. Even so, non-depressed women overestimated their likelihood of getting breast cancer, likely out of worry worry, or anxiety, while depressed women gave figures a lot closer to the statistical truth that they read in the paper they were given. This seems to suggest that depression leads to more even-handed thinking overall, and that depressed individuals may be less susceptible to falling under certain cognitive biases. We generally have two systems of thinking, as Daniel Kahneman wrote about in Thinking Fast and Slow. System 1 thinking is fast and not really effortful. It's the thinking we use to step around a manhole, to tie your shoes. It's automatic and pretty unconscious. System 2 thinking is slow and effortful and used for more complex tasks that engage your working memory, maybe like looking for your friend in a crowd or calculating several lines in a game of chess. Basically anything that requires focus. Research supports that depressed people engage in System 2 thinking significantly more than when they're non-depressed. This is surprising given how we normally portray depressive thoughts. We usually view it as negative, overly anxious, unconstructive, and just things that we should ignore. And while that can still be true, it doesn't erase the fact that depression does lead to enhanced System 2 thinking and level-headedness. By the way, it's not that non-depressed people can't engage their System 2 thinking as much, it's just that depressed people are promoted or almost forced to access it at all times. When you're depressed, you can't help but think and think and think, usually for the worse, until eventually for the better. Now, this isn't a video where I tell you what to do to cure your depression. If there was a method for that, then shit, I need that, send it my way. But when recovering from a period of depression, whether it be through a gradual healing or a breakthrough moment, whether it took a few weeks or several years, the thinking that is ramped up by depressive rumination is a key factor of coming to terms with things and learning from past experiences. There's a reason why people often report a sad time in their life as one that shaped them into the more fulfilled, complete person they are today. And what's important is that this improvement is driven by rumination. See, rumination is like evil introspection, but it is introspection nonetheless. By squeezing out every possibility of what you could have done, what you did wrong, everything that you lost, you eventually reach an acceptance that you couldn't really have done things differently. And you'll think about the things that you'll do differently moving forward, and an appreciation of what you have. In our ancestral environment, this can mean not hunting in reckless ways, telling others not to forage in certain areas that can be dangerous. If you lost a friend to a slippery ledge, constant thought about it would drive people to learn and avoid situations in which that could happen again. If one didn't get depressed following an upsetting event, they wouldn't learn to do anything differently. They wouldn't even recognize what happened as a problem. But if they watched one of their friends die from their recklessness, and that put them in a period of depression, they may be able to get through it. They'll understand why it happened, they'll learn not to do it, and they'll warn others not to do it as well. It's only through depression that we recognize something as a problem and come to learn about that thing and how to avoid it. Of course, depression can go too far and lead to lasting traumas and biases that aren't exactly helpful, but in the context of survival in the wild, it was definitely better to be overly cautious than to not. And when we understand that the main goal of depression is to crank up System 2 thinking, a lot of the other symptoms start to make sense. Anhedonia, which makes you uninterested in everything besides moping around all day, leaves you to want to do nothing else but just ruminate for days on end. In fact, there's a physiological response that backs this up. In melancholic depression, your bodies and muscles gain increased insulin resistance, which makes it harder for them to take in glycogen. This makes the brain far more insulin sensitive, and way more glycogen goes towards the brain for use. This is why depression often makes you physically tired or weak. It literally takes resources from the body and gives it to your mind to think. The whole evolutionary purpose of depression is to think, think, think. So when it's past, you can apply all that you've learned from that thinking. There's a reason that depression comes in response to difficulties in life. It's designed to help us learn from those difficulties and prepare for future ones. In this sense, depression is not an illness. It's an immune response. In the words of Harvard psychiatrist and Twitch streamer Dr. K, it's a feature, not a bug. But just because it's adaptive does not make depression a good thing to be experiencing. Please don't think I'm saying that. It doesn't mean that medicine and therapy are completely useless because depression is this universal, natural solution. Even if some evolutionary psychologists try to push that idea, that's a really naive stance. Depression has its benefits, yes, but it also has plenty of downsides. You lose sleep sleep, potentially harm your social, professional, and personal lives. You might not eat, not defend yourself. And I probably don't have to say more about the worst things that come from it. Depression requires us to have loved ones to take care of us throughout the process for it to be a constructive thing. Otherwise, we would just die during that period of depression. This is probably why social interaction is one of the biggest factors towards a positive mental health and for recovering out of periods of depression. Like most evolved strategies, depression is far from perfect, and it really falls off when faced with the modern world, which we did not evolve within. Depression is adaptive for our ancestral environment, where we were hunter-gatherers in the savannah, not retail workers in first-world suburbs. This is called an environmental mismatch, which I have spoken about more in depth in another video. But basically, these days, exposure to all sorts of things like social media, constant bad news, and terrible economic and social states have completely shifted how our brain interprets things. And this might mean that our depressive response isn't regulated correctly. I mean, we've seen rates of depression skyrocket in recent years, especially in younger people, and it seems increasingly more difficult to treat this. Modern problems cannot simply rely on ancestral solutions. Just because it's adaptive and has a useful function doesn't mean that it'll work for the world today. To say depression is good because it's adaptive and natural is an appeal to nature, a very common logical fallacy. It's like saying because sugar is natural, then it's perfectly healthy to eat a lot of it. That being said, I think understanding where depression comes from and why it arises can be a useful thing for us. It might help us leverage the adaptive qualities of it even in the modern day. Now again, I don't know how to cure depression. I certainly don't know how to treat depressive disorders. But I think that recontextualizing what depression is, from this horrible illness that indifferently infects people to an adaptive response that we express for a reason, even if an ancient one, makes it more manageable. It becomes a human thing to be depressed rather than a pathological one, which, I don't know, makes me feel better about it. Look, everyone has their own journey, whether it be therapy, self-guided development, medication, spirituality, exercise, socializing, or by tossing out all that cliche bullshit and finding your own way. I was quite depressed for a long time, and in the last 2 or 3 years, I've really managed to overcome it, and things have really gotten better. Sometimes I still fall into old habits, bad habits that I've been fighting for a long time, but I am so much more equipped and stronger at dealing with them, and I am so much happier and more fulfilled in the long run. It's weird to say, but I really do think that depression has helped me live my life in a more complete, fulfilled way. I am not the same person on the other side of it, and now I'm on a permanent journey of growth. It's because of my low periods that I have the strength to stand today, or at least to try. If any of you have your own experiences to share, feel free to comment down below. Depending on how this is received, I might talk about more topics like this in the future. Okay, thanks for watching, stay safe, I'll see you guys soon.